Welcome to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast, guest curated and presented by Subterra. In search of solace in this precarious world, we emerge from ocular darkness. Rays of light pierce through the nocturnal, and in these twinkling soundscapes, we are reminded that we are part of something greater than ourselves. As we navigate these curious and luminous spaces, we will explore artist talks, discussions, and original commissioned sound art. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast. As the heat of summer begins to morph into a warm autumn glow, in this episode, we consider what that glow might feel like in the heavenly form of a halo. Halo was a poetic light installation by Swiss-Danish artist Tobias Zehntner that was shown as part of the Fermynwoods Love and Light program in All Saints Church in Earls Barton from the 18th to the 29th of April earlier this year in 2025. Originally commissioned in the Abbaye de la Cambre in Belgium, Halo features a suspended light installation that creates a moving interplay of light and shadow that illuminates the church's architecture and forms halos above the audience. All Saints is an active church at the heart of the village of Earls Barton in Northamptonshire. Named as one of England's 1,000 best churches, it is estimated that the building dates from the later 10th century. The aim of this project was to create a sense of wonder and a shared experience for the local community by bringing this internationally celebrated art installation to a Grade 1 listed Anglo Saxon church in Northamptonshire. In line with this aim, the organisation hoped to revitalise the space as a meeting point, connect different groups, and support tourism within the county. A special church service took place beneath the installation to encourage interfaith and intercultural dialogue, reflection, and contemplation. So, in this episode, we hear from a trinity of voices: Tobias Zehntner, George Turvey, and Chad Chadwick, who will discuss the meaning of this installation in relation to place, community, spirituality, and creation in all senses of that word. Tobias Zehntner, who created Halo, is a visual artist who uses recurring themes of light, movement, space, and time in his practice. His recent work has focused on first-hand experience, often in the form of kinetic works and installations that require time from the viewer, encouraging new ways of seeing. His practice has its roots in architectural space and natural sciences, amplifying the poetic nature of these seemingly controlled and logical inquiries. Chad Chadwick served the first 18 months of his curacy training in All Saints Earls Barton and helped to make the connection with Fermynwoods Contemporary Art that enabled the Halo installation to find its home. He works with children and young people, supporting 380 churches in Peterborough Diocese in the Church of England. Outside of work, he is also an ordained volunteer minister. Chad is passionate about conservation and spiritual ecology and loves encouraging young people to re-engage with wild spaces. Finally, the last but certainly not least voice you will hear is George Turvey, who composed the original music that was played at the Halo launch event and is woven into the conversations that will follow here. George is a recent composition for screen graduate from UCA, and he makes music for film and games. And, as you will hear throughout this episode, his music is otherworldly, arresting, and conjures fascinating imaginary worlds, especially when paired with Tobias's Halo. Anyway, that's more than enough from me now, so without further ado, here are a series of fascinating discussions and reflections with Tobias, Chad, and George.
Well, for me, artwork is kind of I like the term magic because it's something that if a work can captivate me and just makes me want to stare at it, then it's kind of that's for me kind of magical. And then if you can understand how it works and people explain what it is, that how it's done and stuff, and I still want to stare at it and just enjoy it, then there's this kind of magic that is a bit more than just like, especially working with technology and stuff, like where there's often some workings behind that can be interesting in a technological way, or people ask me how did I do it and stuff. And even if I explain it, it doesn't take away from it, because it's not about that. Actually, it's about what it creates. And I love work when that just makes you want to stare at it. And it can be like as simple as a fire that people like to just watch. There's something that draws you to it, even though there's nothing special about it in that sense. It's nothing new. So for me, often I also have kind of, when I have an idea, I work a lot with light, so I kind of have a bit an idea how I can arrange things to trigger interesting things that come together, but I can never imagine it totally. And I have some idea, and often when it's then in the space, there's parts of it that I just didn't see coming, and I kind of can discover it myself like that as well. And so it's often like my main motivation is to see it myself, like to
almost
create
with
a work.
fresh eyes yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, because you just can't totally imagine it. Especially sometimes I take several elements and put them together, like one with synchronicity, that things go together in once and then kind of fall apart. And then you put that together with light dimming on and off, and then with movement. So you take all these elements into one thing, and then you have an idea that it could work, but how it will look, and especially then in the space, which is always a whole new experience when it starts interacting with the architectural space and what is already there.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, like the fact that, you know, the work is very much like digitally kind of, or from what I understand, like there's a lot of kind of science in the making of it. You know, it seems like quite a technical process, but that then even as the artist, when you see it fully fabricated, that it still maintains this level of mystery that even you yourself as the kind of creator could not see until you found it in the space, and see it with fresh eyes. I mean, I think that really does speak to the quote of like modern descendants of magic. It is magical, you know.
Yeah, that you can kind of pair things together like science and art, and that it creates something new that isn't necessarily there before.
Yeah, and working with light must be quite unpredictable, I imagine, in some ways.
There's definitely like I said, the more you work with it, you have a bit of an idea what can kind of trigger what, or in what direction it can go. But it's a very experiential work, so it's always has to be kind of in the space. And like another example, right now I'm working with flash bulbs, which is a very interesting light that I haven't worked with before, and it's not as poetic as my as the dimming light bulbs. But it's funny because I kind of have this idea of like, okay, it's going to be interesting with the shadow throwing around, and then when I try it out, it's such a fast light that you don't even see the shadow. You just see there was some flash, but you have no idea where it came from or what it was. So it's again, and I'm planning this project with loads of them, and I did some animations online, especially for applications and kind of to illustrate a bit, but I have no idea how it's gonna look like when you're in there. So it's really exciting. Kind of, yeah, it's it's fun to work with, and but yeah, it's kind of a surprise how it will turn out.
Yeah. And so, thinking about that with relation to Halo, did you know that the work would be installed in All Saints? Did you know you wanted it to be like a church space? How did you kind of think about that when you were making it?
So it came a bit from a previous work where I worked with circling light bulbs that kind of reacted to each other's proximity. But then it was really an occasion of a light festival. They had different locations in the city, and one was a big church, and that's where I kind of took that idea that I worked with before and tried to see it in a much bigger space. Before it was just like kind of in a small room, and so I it came from the location that I kind of designed it for that. But the movement and the light I was already working with. And so it's kind of a mix of work before and the location that kind of asked for it. So it wasn't the church in All Saints, it was one in Brussels also for a light festival. And that kind of gave me the opportunity to produce it. And then I was able to show it again in All Saints. But it was really then so specific for a church with the title and the kind of how it worked very well. So it was nice to do it again in a church setting.
I kind of stumbled into an exhibition at All Saints in Old Winkle by Pale Dot Collective. Amazing, like really moving. I was really struck by the sensitivity of it, and particularly the way that young people engaged. My work for 25 years has been working with young people, particularly those that are kind of hard to reach, and seeing the young people engage with such a beautiful, sensitive piece of art in such a historical, ancient building was really moving. And so I just really kind of was intrigued by the whole Fermynwoods Contemporary Arts thing, and James and I started a really good conversation, and all things are just born out of conversation. I love that, the way that in conversation you meet each other and in that space, and then just see what's possible. That moment of germination is really important to me. So that was how it started, and then James was clearly looking for a place for Tobias's piece, and All Saints in Earls Barton was a really good bet because it's a Saxon building. The stones have been soaked in prayer for 1,000 years, and it's just beautiful. But it's also it's still got that sense of being the heartbeat of the community, and not all churches are like that. But All Saints is, there was a moment where I first walked in, and there was the crowd was starting to gather. It's for the launch, and there was these just most beautiful glowing bulbs orbiting around just above people's heads. And I was anticipating that, and I'd seen many videos, but it was not just the sheer scale or the kind of like the deep magic that seemed to be at work. And some like C.S. Lewis talks about deep magic as like the work of the Holy Spirit, and it's really interesting. Like sometimes we kind of dislocate our spirituality from everything else, and for me, it's the symbiotic relationship between art and science and spirituality all being one and the same thing that becomes really interesting. So you had this like orbiting just above the people's heads. But what was really interesting for me was just as I stood at the back and just observed what was going on, was that the different generations were all responding in a childlike way, like a playful way. Now, Tobias himself, he's a deeply humble man, and really he comes across as really playful.
Really?
And that's really interesting because there's something about play that is very, very important at the moment. So I think I'd go as far as saying that we've got like an existential crisis going on around play. We really need play in our lives. We have a lot of spiritual disciplines in Christian tradition. So things like fasting and solitude and silence, and they're all really important, really profound, but all can be quite adult and serious. And we never ever include play as a technical or like official spiritual discipline. but we really need play, and the playfulness of the piece moving above us and seeing people of all ages like really mesmerized. That's what caught me first. I think that at the moment when I talk about existential crisis, I think what I mean is, like for me, like imagination stirs in playfulness and hope germinates in imagination. So if we're not playing, and if we're not, that how boredom's so important for children, as an imagination starts to stir, and that's where hope germinates. Now, if a tech-based childhood replaces a play-based childhood, then that for me becomes an existential crisis, because children stop playing, and it's children that teach us how to play.
Yeah.
So for me, Tobias was unlocking something very playful in us, and people didn't know quite what to do with themselves, with their bodies. They just sat like children, looking up, mesmerized. It was just amazing. In the Doctrine of Creation, ex nihilo, you get this sense of this sense of bursting from Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like love and like creatively bursting out. For me, in the Big Bang, and then it says that the Holy Spirit hovered over the waters of creation, and sometimes use the word brooding. The Hebrew word for Holy Spirit is ruach, which means breath of God. So it's a beautiful image of the Holy Spirit brooding. Another Celtic word for the Holy Spirit is engedaglas, I think, which means the wild goose. And so this untamable wildness brooding over the waters of creation. And I absolutely love that. But the question for me isn't like what or how creation came about, but why creation came about. And we don't often ask that why question, because for me, like, God didn't need us. Like, if he did, theologically, that's really problematic. If God needed us, if there's codependency going on in some way, that's theologically like really like dangerous, screwed up territory. So I don't think God needed us. That means if he didn't need us, he must have desired us. So like that means he desired the universe's existence, all those beautiful constellations and all of the intricate, delicate balance in each habitat and ecosystem. Like, I love the fact from like the macro to the micro, there was a desire, a longing, and that there's a deep resonance in that for me. And that's, I think, why I felt so like moved by what Tobias had done.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because to me then it makes me think about these light entities in the church with a sense of agency that I hadn't given to them before. Like a desire or a longing, or like, I know, I just thought of them as these kind of like beautiful kind of like angelic images, but to think of them as having some kind of agency, I think is really interesting, and also quite frightening.
Because a view as an artist, man, like, so it means when you're creating, you're feeling that sense of bursting, like whether it's a bursting spring joy or a bursting like autumn
labor,
or like lament in winter. Whatever you're feeling, you can. For me, it's interesting. You can trace the roots of that creative bursting right back to that brooding over the waters of creation, even before then, right back to nothingness. And the power of nothingness in art is really very profound. And also the fact that God is still creating, and this is my not everyone will agree with this, but I get that sense of he's still creating, or she is still creating, and there's a bursting out all the time.
It seemed like there's a real sense of community around that church as well. Just from having, read James and Jenny's kind of opening words at the opening. And I just thought that was quite interesting, like that you maybe couldn't have predicted that there would be that sort of sentiment around the space as well, that gives it this extra added meaning that maybe, obviously when you're in the studio, you're so kind of, well, at least for me anyway, when I'm in my studio, I'm just thinking about like the artwork. And then I can't predict sometimes how the space that it's shown in will kind of contribute to not necessarily just the architecturally, but just the people who come. And it seems like it really had this kind of interactive element that community was really important to So yeah, I was just wondering how that felt coming from another country and just, being there.
It was very interesting because it was the third time I showed it. So once was with a light festival in a big church, but that lasted for a couple nights, where people came to the church that didn't necessarily went to this church. It was like loads of people just wandering through the city and seeing different works. So there it was the space, but it wasn't the setting that much. And then the second time I showed it in a small decommissioned church that wasn't used anymore and was actually an art center. So it was a white space with no chairs and stuff. And there it changed completely the behavior of the people. So the first one, people kind of got solemn but quiet, but they just kind of walked through. The second one, where there was nothing in the space, the kids started running after the light bulbs, people lied on the floor or danced around. It was a completely different approach. And then at All Saints, it was completely different again, because there it was really in use. And the church really was up for having it running while they were using the church space, which the first church wasn't like that, actually. They turned it off once they had something going on. So it was a very welcoming community that kind of was open to have their the artwork together with their events, and that was really fun to see how it kind of created something new again. So I just add something to the space to kind of change the space and focus on the space. But then the church community also created events around it that again took it somewhere else, like with the music that was composed and played.
Yeah.
And it's just like a whole different experience, which is just adding to something else, which is wonderful, especially since reinstalling the same work. It's nice if it changes, like just by the community and by the space. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, my process of making music, it's more so, I mean, I love watching films and stuff and playing games, so I get lots of inspiration from there.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and for this project in particular, it was more, I don't know, well, sci-fi based,
Cool.
more than that because of halos and it's in the sky and everything.
Yeah.
And the biggest inspiration and process towards the music, I'd say, was the film. Have you watched the film Arrival, where they've got
Yeah, I
like, yeah,
love
yeah.
that film.
So it's kind of like that, because everything's kind of like, I don't know, it's just so, I don't know, different. And I thought it really, really fitted the space. So with this, yeah, so I use lots of inspirations from there. Um, I use voices, organs, strings, synths, and stuff like that, to just try and mess around a bit to get the initial sound.
Yeah,
And then I thought, okay, yeah, this kind of works. And then I made it a bit longer, and yeah, it worked with that processing. And then
nice.
so so yeah, it was mostly my processes are literally just watching films and then taking some inspiration from there and seeing
Yeah.
where it goes.
It's funny because I didn't think about because obviously I never had the opportunity to see the Halo sculptures in person, but it was only when I spoke to Chad that I realized that like there's a very fine line between them looking really lovely but also having this kind of like alien quality to them, you know, like there is something, as you say, very sci-fi about them, and it's actually a little bit scary but not in a bad way. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So I think I can totally see where you were coming from with thinking about Arrival, where you're kind of interacting with these kind of entities that you don't
Yeah.
fully understand. And in that film, don't they spend so much time trying to kind of crack the code of what it is that
Yeah.
they're trying to say?
Yes.
So maybe your music is almost like that intermediary between the sculpture and our visual interpretation of them. I quite
Yeah.
like that your music is almost like cracking the code in a sense.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much where I got, well, that was one of the inspirations. And then the other
Yeah.
ones was like, well, there's composer Max Richter, and then there's a string writer John Metcalf, who does a lot
Mm.
of stuff. Like these all, and then actually a bit of what's his name, Tom York, in some of it.
Oh yeah.
But like, because in one of the, it was called Dreamers. I mean, I've named it something else now, but yeah, it's like very well. It used to be a house piece, so I kind of took the house kind of like drums out of it for the church thing because I didn't think that it would work. But yeah,
Different kind of event.
yeah, just a bit. Yeah, it kind of led like a cinematic feel to the
Mm.
instead of from the difference of, because there was an organist there at the same time playing his music, and then I
Okay.
had my like kind of like cinematic technological kind of like well, more modern music.
So did they play at the same time, like the organ and your music, or did it kind of feed into each other at different
No, they kind
times?
of like fed into each other different times,
Right.
so we like
Right.
took turns. But yeah,
It's quite cool, isn't it? Like to I don't know, organs are just such a kind of like that makes me think of films like Interstellar, you know, thinking about that there is definitely a relationship between this kind of like church-like music and the sci-fi, which I
yeah.
hadn't thought about before, but
Which
totally.
which brings me on to the to one of my other pieces, which does link with Interstellar because I use organs in it as well,
Yeah.
which worked with the whole church space and like
Yes.
because I mean I also made it bearing in mind that it was going to be played in a church, so
Yeah.
I thought I'd use voices, organs and strings, more like traditional instruments. So yeah.
Yeah. Was it fun to kind of like, had you ever done a project like that before where you were thinking about a church-like space, or was this your first chance to kind of really play into that kind of making?
Yeah, no, this was literally my first chance. So
Yeah.
I was like, I have to do this because it's gonna have great reverb and it's gonna
Yeah.
sound amazing anyway. So yeah,
Yeah. No, it is really amazing. And did you get to spend much time with the Halo like installation before you started making the music, or did you just see photos, or how did it work?
all I saw was photos of it previously in different churches, just
Right.
the swinging lights, and then
Yeah.
that was it. And I was like, because all yeah, because it was all like someone said, can you do music on like the on how the bulbs swing side to side and like if there's a tempo or something.
Mm.
There was no accurate tempo because they were all
That would have been so difficult.
swinging different times. But but I tried my best. I mean, I made it more like the track Mountains from Interstellar, where it's like it's got that constant ticking sound, and then and then it kind of like builds and builds and builds.
So then when you finally did get to see your music played in the space and in kind of relationship to Tobias's work, did it change your the meaning of the music? Did you see it in a new light, in a new space? Because sometimes I think, you know, we make something and we think we know it, and then we see it like performed, or we see it in a gallery space, or we see it and it just takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like some of the other pieces weren't even meant to be like for this installation. I was like, I made
Really?
this, and then it kind of works its way into it. But seeing it live, I was like, wow, this is this is quite something.
But yeah, George was talking a bit about how he kind of responded to your artwork, and he said that such a big part of the inspiration for him was like sort of like sci-fi films, like Interstellar and Arrival, you know, like that kind of thing, which I found really interesting because like it probably would have been my initial thought too, not that I'm musical, but there's something sort of like, there's this sense of agency in the lights, especially within a church space. You know, it's like they kind of embody this sort of like Holy Spirit almost, or this alien entity. So yeah, it was just really interesting to hear his response to that. And it also made me think, and maybe this is something you might want to comment on or not, I don't know, but like the relationship between like that which is beautiful, but also that which is kind of terrifying, because if they do have agency and if they are this kind of otherworldly entity, like what is their goal, what is their purpose? But yeah, that kind of added an extra layer of interest to me when I heard him.
That's like, for me, it's just like this sign how when you create a work, it's its own work, and it will, like, it really feels like hanging it there and let it be, and then it kind of has its own life with everybody that brings their experience to it. So it, like you say, musician will bring another thing to it, and then the church community that sees it. For me, it was to start out with a lot of movement, light, architecture, the space, and then I just see how everybody brings their own to it, which is quite fascinating. I love it that it's not so it's its own, like I created it, I let it go, and then it has its own life with everybody that sees it, and which for me is kind of nice. Like that's how art can
Totally
can inspire people, and can also be a space where people can create their own thoughts for it.
Yeah, and I think for me it's interesting, especially like that it was in a church, because I suppose as someone who is not religious, I feel this kind of slight discomfort in that space, maybe because it's not somewhere that I frequent very often. So I was curious if like maybe something you've thought about is like your relationship to that kind of space, and if there was any kind of discomfort in working in that kind of space, or comfort, or I don't know. I thought it was quite interesting that I had these kind of natural kind of slight fear, maybe, I don't know. But maybe that speaks to how the art world and church worlds maybe don't coincide enough. I don't know. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, especially like I'm like you, non-religious, and I usually go to churches just during off times to, if any, to see the architecture, and so I think for me it was a bit of curiosity, because I really just I don't see that space in that sense that often, and I found it kind of interesting how like the work then can kind of generate different thoughts for different communities. So for me, it was kind of it was interesting to see, and at the same time, it's also just I didn't make it for that, like and I'm not going to be the church artist that now only makes works in churches. It's just it fitted very well, and
Totally.
And it works in a sense without needing to be like that, but also kind of it adds to it. Like and if people bring the religious point of view into it, it still works, but it also works without. So I feel it doesn't, the religious point of view doesn't take away from the work or make it very...
I think it adds to it for sure.
Yeah, and it doesn't close it off for other people. kind of actually, as some people said, it also opens the church to other people, because there's another way to go there. So it's as long as I don't think it's a work that can be used in that sense, but it's a very private thing how different people see in it. But I don't think it can be kind of like be taken over by one or the other kind of, if it's sci-fi or
totally,
or religion. So I kind of like, I'm totally fine as long as it's this.
No, it's great. I think
I feel it's a positive opening up to different communities without excluding other parts.
I think so too, and I think any opportunity to show work not in a kind of white cube gallery space is always really, really interesting. As you say, how it changes the meaning of the work, but also just how it just makes it more accessible to other kind of communities and other groups of people.
Which, like, I'm really not a specialist at all in that, but I find it's just funny how first art was only in the church. It feels kind of like it was used for that. So I don't know, kind of coming a bit back from the white cube.
And Chad Chadwick, the minister who we spoke with as well, he really kind of advocated for, churches not just being a religious site, and for him, like, obviously religion is found everywhere, like in the woods or outside in nature. So I think kind of, infusing this space with artworks is, personally, I would love to show some of my artwork in a church. That's like definitely on my bucket list. So it's very cool to see how it was received, just as someone who's always been curious about doing it too.
Well, it's really that's thanks to that community. I don't think you can have that everywhere, but that they were so excited to have a work coming to there, and then organized everything around it to make it to add to it was just fantastic. It was a really good match.
Yeah, no, it was great. So then the thing I was really curious about, which I asked Chad, who you would think might know a lot about this as someone who works in the church, but I asked him a bit about the symbolism of the halo, and he was like, I don't know anything about it. And I know you might not either, but I just think it's so fascinating as like a symbol that everyone kind of knows, but maybe it's just powerful in its kind of how ubiquitous it is, but maybe we actually don't really know that much about it.
No, it's the same. Like, I mean, obviously I took the title from just from the setting and how it turned out, and it was like it was a good match. But indeed, it's like not totally related, but I already had people coming to the work and ask, where are the rings? Because on the pictures I often took with a long exposure. And they expected kind of these rings to be there, and I kind of found that's funny, because like people really wanted to see that, and I kind of it's a funny part of that work, because that's something beautiful, but that you can only see with a camera that can do long exposure. So it's like really not easy to photograph with a phone, and on video it sometimes isn't that interesting. So it's really, again, a work that is best just to be there, to sit under it.
It kind of reminds me of like paranormal photography, where it's like, it's only in that space that it can actually be seen, which adds to, this question of magic that you spoke about earlier. Time and space is so important to, and experiential. It's all different ways of seeing the artwork, which is really interesting as well. Yeah, the word that comes to mind is kind of wonder as well, isn't it? It's like childlike wonder. Because how often now do we actually feel kind of in awe or like experience that feeling of wonder? I feel like art and potentially religion are maybe two places where that can actually happen, and that is also, as you say, to do with technology for adults as well. I think there is something deeply aesthetic about technology as well, isn't there? You know, like thinking about, you know, what you said about fasting and all these things, but it's also like, you know, doom scrolling and just like constant kind of awareness of everything negative that's going on in the world, which I think we should be we should be knowledgeable about those things, but the question of like, to what extent should you constantly be thinking or looking at these things, or like harrowing, I don't know. I see what you mean, and I think potentially for people who aren't in any way involved in any kind of faith or who don't practice any kind of religion, maybe associate it with those aesthetic things that you mentioned, but actually maybe it can also be an opening out for feelings of wonder.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. And it's really like kind of in this cultural moment, I think that's particularly profound, because we're seeing like both anecdotally and in like more quantitative data, we're seeing a trend forming in the church at the moment. And this is nationally. It's sometimes being referred to as the quiet revival, and where lots and lots of younger people, particularly young males, but and particularly young adults actually, are coming back to the church. It bucks all of the trends, all of what we would anticipate around historic church decline in terms of numbers. Is we're now seeing much more increased engagement. I think there's something, even in your last podcast with Adrienne, you were touching on some of this. Something really profound about the physical and the tangible, and particularly around ritual and rhythm. I just think there's the reason young people are engaging is because, in terms of like how that overwhelming immaterialism kind of just sweeps them off, they don't know who they are and where they stand, that then when you have a rootedness in spirituality in your local community, especially in a building that's 1,000 years old, but it doesn't have to be a building that's 1,000 years old, it's what it represents. No wonder young people are starting to come back to the church. It's been really interesting. So part of my paid work, outside of being an ordained minister, is to help churches prepare for that.
Interesting. I think there'll probably be, for myself included, a lot of kind of natural discomfort in thinking about, if you're not a practicing, if you don't like, I feel like, it's hard to label yourself, but I feel like I would label myself as agnostic, let's say. And there is this kind of like nervousness around the space of the church and what it represents historically and in the kind of modern setting. But I think that it's a really interesting space for an artwork to be shown in. I think, like, personally, I grew up in Ireland, which is obviously a very Catholic country, and whenever I go into a church, Catholic church, which is the only church I've kind of been into, even though I don't consider myself to be Catholic, the feeling that I get when I'm in a church is like just pure energy, like creative energy, and it's so beautiful. And I have often gone into churches just to experience, like, on my own, just kind of walking around a city, just to be on my own, just to have a place to reflect and to just feel that kind of energy. And I think, like, that is no different in many ways to gallery spaces for, to go into a modern art gallery, for example. The feeling is similar, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love, in that sense, it's really hard to put it into words or put your finger on it, that there's something going on there, isn't there? Hence, like, even like earlier we talked about that sense of like the stones being soaked in prayer for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
How do you begin to describe? Because there's nothing physiological going on there,
No.
but you feel it.
Yeah.
Most people have their deepest spiritual connections outside in nature. And so one of the most important things I've been doing at work is meeting people in neutral spaces, because people have a fear of going into church buildings. It's really interesting when we take groups of young adults on digital detoxes into ancient woodland. They tread very, very gently, and they hush their voices. There's like a physiological response to being in ancient woodland, and it's very similar when people go into kind of ancient or medieval churches. And so that resonance between the ancient building and the ancient woodland is really important to me. But particularly when we meet one another in a neutral space with humility, and with a real genuine sense of openness. So most of my friends are not Christians. Lots of my friends are atheists. And I just love sitting down with a glass of wine and just talking that through. I learned so much from them. And it's been really important in my own faith journey is to be spending time with people that don't believe in God, who could challenge me and test me. And I have no fear around that, because I love the way I learn from them and feel constantly challenged. And their questions are good and right. And sometimes I have no answer, but equally sometimes it's the other way around too.
I had a good chat with Chad about this because, you know, I'm not a religious person or anything, but it's quite a kind of tricky space to be in if you're not religious and you're making work in a church. And yeah, I almost felt a bit uncomfortable talking to him about religion. Not that, you know, he's so open and so lovely, and he made me feel better about the whole thing, but it is a kind of tricky space to be in if you're not religious, I think, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm not typically that religious either. I mean, I used to be, and then I kind of grew apart. Yeah, so my best way was linking it with sci-fi because I thought what's closer to it kind of works.
It's almost like trying to access the same thing that religion is, which is this kind of like unanswerable questions about like
exactly.
the size of the world, the universe that we
Yeah.
can never understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the creator, I don't know, but yeah,
Yeah,
of like
whatever it
something.
is, totally. And I think it's great that this project was able to bring people together who had all sorts of different beliefs, but it all kind of just made sense together, and answered or, you know, fulfilled that need for maybe a lot of different people with different philosophies.
Well, I mean, so most of it is digitally made. Some of it is just recorded with like some of it's just sounds and stuff. So I've like I don't know knocked on a frying pan. I mean, I didn't in this case, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And then some of them I fortunately had the pleasure of recording a string quartet at uni. So I kind of had one that so I had them record one of the pieces, which was nice. But other than that, yeah, most of it's all digitally because, I mean, I wish I could play my instruments to their standard, but I can't.
I know, but it's so cool, isn't it, that you have the technology to create sounds of instruments that you might not even have, or you know, it's just really amazing to see how it all comes together.
Yeah.
Do you think it changes how you start making something if you know that it's going to be interacting with something visually rather than just like a sound piece on its own? Is it more like storytelling than, you know, like just your traditional song? Or
Well, I mean, I think not gonna lie, I think most music is storytelling to a certain extent,
For
but
sure.
yeah, film music definitely, yeah, you have to convey something. You have to have some sort of melody to to portray a character or a being or like an object, and then you have to like tell a story within that
Yeah.
to like to get somewhere, which
Yeah.
works most of the time.
Yeah. And it has to really kind of maybe build in a way, you
Yeah.
know, there's something more, there's a relationship to time passing that maybe there isn't in non-film composition, which is interesting, I think, thinking about time in a church space and time passing. I just think, yeah, I'm really gutted that I didn't get to experience it firsthand, because I think I would have been probably quite moved to see it all together.
Well, yeah, no, loads of people came up to me and were like, "Oh, I really like this track and this track and for this reason and stuff like that." And I just wasn't expecting. I was like, "Huh? People talking to me? What?" Um, but yeah, no, they were yeah, people loved it and yeah, and I wasn't expecting it at all. Um, especially well, of the amount of people that turned up as well, because I thought it was well, I didn't know how many people were going to turn up at all, so I thought it was going
Yeah.
to be like the normal church congregation and then just
Yeah.
the family. But no, like a bunch of people came up in the village, and like some people came from elsewhere and stuff like that, and it was great.
That's
It was
amazing.
really good.
That's really good. Oh, it's such a and you've just graduated, haven't you?
Yes, I literally graduated on Friday, so yeah,
So that's such a great kind of feather to have in your cap, isn't it? For your
yeah.
like just in terms of like how unique a project to be part of and to get to do. It's so cool.
I've always loved making sci-fi music since I've watched all these sci-fi
Yeah.
films and other ones as well. But yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's definitely not closed the chapter, I guess, in sci-fi music and minimalist music. But yeah, it's definitely helped it go further because I
Hmm.
mean now I've done it, I now know what to do, and then I can add different things and take away for previous parts that I didn't really like.
Yeah.
So that really works as well. I mean, as well as also kind of like going on to the minimalist music side of the sci-fi music, it then helps for like really ambient scenes in films. So yeah, it kind of works its way into what I want to do as well as doing other things. So yeah.
I think, was it Jenny spoke at the opening? She mentioned that she mentioned the church as a kind of like liminal space of the sacred in between, which I thought was really beautiful, and wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, like one of the things I love most is just playing, especially like seeing how children play and learning from them. And so, like, one of my favorite things was taking children in to see the exhibition. And I took my own twins. Well, no, I've got 11-year-old twins, and they haven't got a phone yet. So they just, it's really good because their reaction to things is just like right there in the moment, like all of their senses, like just responding to the thing that's in front of them, whether that's a person or a whatever, or in this case, a piece of art. And they just stood there. So, and they're really different. My daughter was like really intrigued and clearly very stimulated and like moving quickly around the space and like kind of work it out and try to take it all in somehow, like kind of get around the art and like bring it in and understand it somehow. Like physically, her response was quite quick and very stimulated. And my son, he just stood there, and he's usually wired, like he's all over the place. He just stood there. He's got a visual impairment,
right?
And so we can't quite work out how much he would have been able to see, especially in a really dark, huge dark space with these glowing orbs above his head. But he just stood there in this sense of deep peace. And so the word liminal space is really helpful. Sometimes we call it a thin space, like this, like a thin space between heaven and earth. I think children particularly understand the thin space better than us. And he just stood there and felt something, and I just stood with him, and then left him to just be on his own for a little while. And for a really long time, he just stood underneath this sense of movement and light and love, and just stood in this deep sense of peace, which for him was really rare. And it was really lovely seeing the way the two of them responded in such different ways. Yeah. There's a verse which says, like, whatever is bound on earth is bound in heaven, and whatever is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. So you get this direct sense of connection between earth and heaven. And then even in the Lord's Prayer, it says, on earth as it is in heaven, and so on. So there's like loads of different references that all like allude to the same thing. But there's something about like, and I still don't really understand the science of prayer, and I never will. But when you like unlock or like something's unbound on earth, like say for instance, like resentment or like bitterness or whatever, like this is why forgiveness is so important. It's both in a personal way and like a global political way. But like when we lose something, when we let go of something, so we have this kind of understanding that clearly we feel better here on earth because we forgave someone, and there's like almost like a physiological response to forgiveness, like a loosening, a lightening. But how about if there was something way more powerful going on in terms of the connection between earth and heaven, so that when something's broken here on earth, when we forgive someone, that in heaven something in a spiritual dimension unlocks in a way that we can never ever understand. That might describe to me why that feels so profound. And so when you stand in those liminal or thin spaces, something very big is going on, like way bigger than we could ever imagine. And I think for me, when children stand in those spaces, just feeling with their heart and their mind, but also with their gut as an emotional center, they feel something in their gut moving that is not just earthly, it's heavenly.
You can find more from Tobias at his website, tobiaszehntner.com, and you can find more from George on his Spotify under the name George Turvey, as well as on YouTube at George Turvey. All of this and accompanying images will be in the episode description on our website, as always. Listeners on Spotify are able to experience an accompanying video to this episode by artist Sapphire Goss. And for listeners on other platforms, you can find Sapphire's work on our website. All of this will also be included in the episode description. Sapphire Goss is an artist who works with moving image, photography, and other lens-based methods. Using obsolete technologies, she creates chimerical imagery using unexpected materials, looping and processing to make an analog uncanny. Grainy, shimmering, otherworldly bursts of light and emotion that are both moving and mysterious. Thank you for listening to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please make sure to positively rate, review, and subscribe. It helps other people find the podcast, and it does make us feel good about ourselves. This episode has been curated by Subterra and presented by me, Marie Chantal Hamrock, and edited by Astrid Björklund. Love and Light is Fermynwoods Contemporary Art's current thematic programme. This episode has been funded by the Northamptonshire Community Foundation's Compton Fund. Visit fermynwoods.org for more information on this programme and to sign up to our monthly email newsletter. Follow us at Fermynwoods on Instagram and Facebook, and make sure to check out myself and Astrid as Subterra at Subterrestrials on Instagram. Thank you for listening. With love and light, Marie and Astrid.